Welcome to Between Two Clinicians, the podcast that gives you a backstage pass into the mind of two therapists. I'm Talia.
I'm Adam Luke. We've spent years helping others navigate the complexities of their minds and relationships.
In this podcast, we're flipping the script, and we're sharing our own unfiltered insights. No topic is off limits, and no issue too taboo. We're ready to tackle the tough stuff with honesty and empathy. Let's dive in.
Well, hello.
Hello.
How are we all?
I'm well, actually. How are you doing?
I'm doing well as well.
Good. I'm excited for today's episode.
I'm always waiting for the audience to be like, "We're good," right? Like it's the night show.
Like a sitcom or it would be a sitcom, right? When they had live audiences. Yeah,
absolutely. That's no more, or at least not how we do these things.
No, but that would be cool to record in front of a live studio audience.
I'd be down.
Yeah. If you ever have, I remember when we were first texting and I shifted to using Riverside as the platform, and I was like, I'll be in Riverside soon. And you're like, wow, did you get a fancy new studio in Riverside, the city? And I'm like, no, Riverside, the website. You were like, oh, that makes more sense.
It wasn't nearly as cool as I was just like, oh, wow, she's actually traveling to the studio. And here I am just patching in. I felt bad. I was like, oh, this is lopsided in what we're doing here. And then you're like, no,
it's the recording. Yeah.
Like, when as a millennial you feel yourself age into boomer status, right?
So true. I love it. I think today's episode will be interesting at minimum for a lot of the listeners, especially if you tuned into our last episode about cheating. I think there was two before. We had one in the middle. Whatever. That one really did well. And I think the topic of betrayal, infidelity, when relationships don't go the way that we think they ought to or that we agree to. And we also you and I talked off air about what could today's topic be, and we stumbled upon, you worded it much more eloquently than I did. You translated well, let me say. You said, I like the stable relationship turnoff prompt, and then I reworded it, new ick, stability. So That's what we will be talking about today. What does stability look like in a relationship, but also why is that a turnoff for some people, even though we know that's the optimal secure functioning partner and secure functioning relationship involves stability, yet so much of culture and society today lauds it, but it's this ethereal thing that's so hard to find, when sometimes it's not, because I do work, and I'm sure you do too, with a lot of clients who are like, they were so nice, they texted me back, they made sure to have all these plans, they had my favorite water in the fridge when I went up, whatever it is. Not for me. I'm gonna dump him and go back to the guy who never texts me back and treats me like shit.
Exactly. The guy only texts me at 2 a.m. and then never texts me back.
I love him. Yeah. It's going to be so great on our story page. No, it's not. If there's a thing for single parenting a wedding, that's what you would be doing with somebody who texts you only at 2 a.m.
Yeah. I'm going to actually create an app called Hard Times, and it's only going to be for frat boys. And then the other is going to be super committed females.
Love it.
Then it's just hard times. So anyways, that was probably where I turned off most of you to the conversation.
That show, though, what was it called? Fuckboy Island?
Yes.
Yes. And they had to determine if the guy was a fuckboy or not.
It was so
This is
good.
essentially, the ones and there's another viral video that portrays this blonde girl, and it's a panel of guys, and the question asked was, what is your ideal first date, or how would you make me fall in love, or whatever. And he categorically describes breaking down her psyche, gaslighting her, whatever else, barely giving her the bare minimum or what have you. And then at the end, she gets to pick who she wants to be with, and she picks him. I don't know what it is. It's not even the bad boy complex. It's to juxtapose, why is stability an ick? It's because instability and inconsistency not only is the strongest reinforcement schedule in psychology and social psychology, it has been normalized that that's what to expect. So if you get even a little bit better than the bare minimum, settle for it and run with it. And then full stability is oh, they're so boring. They don't make my nervous system feel like I'm at Six Flags. What do you want? You have to pick one.
I mean, that's why I think this podcast goes hand in hand with the one that we just did. It's almost we sort of put the cart before the horse, because this is actually how we walk ourselves into the position of being cheated on.
Mm.
And I know that some people, man, that could elicit some emotions there. I'm not saying that you deserve it, but I'm saying that
Mm-mm.
we put ourselves in a position where we move closer to the fire. So the increased potential of being burned is there, right? I loved what you just said when you're like, "Well, why the heck did she choose him?" Right? I think it's because it's like a mosquito zapper. We just get
Mm.
we get sucked into whether it's the drama, whether it's the chaos. Like you said, we're so psychosomatic and not even realizing it. There's some sort of feeling we get out of it. And I've asked like some of the clients I've worked with was, "Hey, was this relationship about skydiving?" Because
Mm.
yeah, it feels exciting, it feels scary, and we actually are like mislabeling danger for attachment or connection because we go,
Mhm.
"Oh, well, it makes me feel something." Where it's like relationships, when you hit that boring spot, when you're like, "God, it was so boring, we just don't fight." How about do you talk? Do you like there is a level where when we get into healthy relationships, especially when we haven't maybe previously experienced them or sought them out, that the healthiness of the relationship actually makes us want to isolate more because damn it, I have a person that cares about me. Like
And a person I'd rather spend time with. Yeah.
Like, so a part of my practice is working with female CEOs, entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
Fortune 500s. Like, I love this dynamic that I have. But working with these individuals, what I find out a lot is this Prince Charming that shows up is actually attentive to my needs, is paying attention. I can't
Mhm.
slide into the shadows. The ambiguity isn't there because that person is actually prompting and instigating connection. They're making bids. And what's interesting is when we're not used to that healthy sort of collaboration, all of a sudden we see that person as being really needy. And the neediness is actually coming from us saying, "I don't normally get this in relationships, so you shouldn't have it either."
Mhm. And to your point about experiencing what we usually give others, most of
Mm,
the time I've noticed women who overfunction often pick the fuck boys or the bad boys because two parts. The young 20s typically
mhm.
prefrontal lobe development archetype is more apt to go for the dark triad or dark quadrant, whatever
Yeah.
personality traits, because bad boys have integrity. No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do this. No, I'm not going to follow that law. No, like there's this edginess that's almost this
Mhm,
primal survival, like, oh, they would stand up to somebody, like they would fight a guy for me, what have you. That shit gets real old once you have kids and you're like 30 and
mm,
40 and they're like, I'm going to go ride my motorcycle with Brad. It's like, maybe you could help like with bath time though. It's like, no, I don't do that, babe. Like the lack of integrity that you find sexy when you're in your young 20s is going to drive you to divorce in your 30s and 40s. So just wanted to make a note on that. And the overfunctioning woman is used to let me audition, let me perform to
mm.
show you that you can't leave because look at all I've done for you, essentially. And the bad boy who barely gives, or if we have the Beauty and the Beast archetype, where I
Yeah.
finally chipped away and I won the bad boy and I'm his, special prize, and oh, he would never do that to me. I feel like you're first on the hit list. Like you're the first person that he would do all of that stuff to. You're not that special. You made yourself that special. You wanted to be seen as that special. He gave you glimpses of that, and that's what you held on to. And that's, I think, what keeps over functioners going for the bad boy or going
Mhm,
for the instability because it's a chance, again, for them to audition. Whereas if I'm an over functioner and the person is stable and pursuing me, making an effort, coming to me, then where's my role? I'm just supposed to say yes when you ask me on a date. We're not going to go back and forth and argue about where it
yeah.
is and when you're going to pick me up and this and that. Like when you show up and get into like an eye to eye relationship and it's
Mm,
equitable, that can be an ick. And the stability that the person is offering you can be destabilizing to the partner who is
yep,
typically the over functioner. And also, like you're saying, part of your practice, mine as well, they're over functioning catapults them to career success, but it actually
yeah.
is a downfall in how they approach their romantic relationships.
Well, so then my question in this, and it's because I love hearing a thought outside of my own, is why then do we continue to go back to the beginning, go back to the spot where we're betrayed or we're set up for failure or we're set up for sadness. Like, why do we go there?
I think from an analytic perspective, repetition compulsion would be the best explanation. If stability is an ick to you, let's look back to your childhood. Did you have stability at all, or did you
Mm-hmm.
have instability? Did you romanticize one day having a stable home life, a stable relationship, yet you don't have any subconscious blueprint for it? So when it
Hmm.
arrives in your life, you regress or you sabotage because you feel potentially unworthy or unskilled in navigating it. And
Yeah.
so the regression or the instigation of making even the most stable of relationships unstable. We see that when anxiously
Yeah.
attached partners, especially, engage in protest behavior. Well, things are going, it's like that meme, things are going too well, where the squinty eye, and then we instigate a fight, and then we're like, oh, I got my hit.
Mm-hmm.
I like that again. So we go back and we pick, in my view, we go back and we pick that in part because of repetition compulsion, but in
Yeah.
another part because our nervous systems will pick familiar chaos over
Mm.
unfamiliar stability. And if I don't know how to navigate it, if it's
Yeah.
a waters I've never charted before, or
Mm.
no one I know that I can ask about has charted it successfully, I may just not get in the boat at all, rather than look at
Mm.
it as an opportunity to be like, this is scaring me, like to be on, the stable, the cruise, right? Instead of choppy waters. I'm not going like whitewater rafting. I'm going down like a canal in Venice almost with like my lover.
Yeah.
How can I navigate that, and how can I tolerate those feelings of ickiness when stability enters my life? That would be another
Mm-hmm.
existential question I would encourage listeners to ask themselves based on the question you asked. Why do we go
Mm.
back to it? What do you think?
I mean, you nailed it. I think as like a clinical definition, 100% all the way in. I don't have any different takeaway there. I think most people don't take into consideration that loop that we do. Like, why do I find myself back here? A lot of times it's because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, we are very uncomfortable uh, with the safety aspect, but we're extremely comfortable with knowing how the process is going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes I'll sit down with my clients and they'll talk about like, oh, I'm making it through the 6 month
Yeah.
checkpoint. And you're like, 6 month checkpoint, walk me. Oh, none of my relationships make it past 6 months, right? And then it's like, well, let's walk through that. Like, why? Oh, well, this is we're gonna start getting deeper. And it's also that subconscious process of like the uncoupling that happens,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, oh no, I get a key? Do um, we start mingling our friends or bringing in family? How do we do this? And what's interesting is that we sometimes won't even have the conversations that lead to clarity. We'll stay in the positions of ambiguity just because it's easier then for us to almost go into this relationship with a parachute still on.
Yeah.
I can rip
Yes.
out at any time.
Yes. Yeah. I don't. I was just talking to someone I'm working with earlier this week about that, the like fail safe, like the breakup insurance apartment,
Mhm.
where it's like we're moving in together because it's so stable and maybe we're engaged and like we hit all the
Yeah.
milestones, but like maybe I'll renew my lease just in case, like this doesn't work. Or maybe I'll make it an Airbnb, or like they own the condo and they're
Yeah.
like worrying about, do I sell it or whatever. I think in some ways it is an escape
Mhm.
path. It's a path that when you are able to truly not see stability as an ick,
Yeah.
and you can see an eye to eye relationship as something worth striving for, and worth tolerating the discomfort of experiencing, even if it's unfamiliar, that the confines of a labeled relationship,
Yeah.
maybe escalating to an engagement, and maybe escalating
Yep.
ultimately to marriage or some other commitment ceremony that symbolizes or is close to marriage, if you don't want to go
Mm.
the traditional like government route, which is fine. I have my own thoughts on that. Any amount though of escalation of
Mhm.
commitment can face a person with like the avoidant tendencies or the confinement tendencies of like, oh my gosh, it's like this one person forever if you're in a monogamous relationship, when in reality It's a relief. The
Mm,
goal is that the relief of, oh my gosh, I only have to be with this person for the rest of my life. Thank fuck, I don't have to go date again. We want people to look forward to that rather than dread it. And I think the escape path of, well, we're just in a relationship, just in quotes, in a
mhm,
relationship, I could leave at any point. Well, we're in a relationship and we have a lease together, I could always just break the lease. Oh, well, we're in a relationship, or we're engaged and we're living together, even if we bought it, I could always sell it, right? There's all these kind of safeguards
mm,
ramping up to, like, if you're in a committed relationship or you've signed legal documents to attest to
yeah,
that, there is no escape really. Like, it takes a minimum of 6 months to
mhm,
leave, but like, there is more safeguard in place so that you don't just get to, at the first sign of conflict, be like,
mm,
screw this, I'm leaving you. And I think a lot of the times, delaying even the conversation of escalating the relationship keeps people in that narrative of, ew, it's so gross to be in a stable relationship. You should have, quote unquote, an escalation within 18 months to 2 years, maybe 3 years. If it's a stable relationship, that's a appropriate trajectory and a timeline. But
mhm,
how often do we see the attraction of instability? Well, it's been 7 years and they say this and they say that. Like, that should be more of the turnoff than
well,
the
yeah,
ick. Yeah, the ick of stability of, like, I want to escalate this, not in a forced way, but here's what I'm
no,
about. Here's what I intend to do in our relationship. I'd love if you join me. My ultimate goal is whatever it might be, marriage and kids. Are you interested in that? And then you find somebody who's like, why, by golly, yes, I am also interested in that. Let's arrange to be married, right? Like, that is so different also in society today, because I also want to kind of
mm,
throw a wrench in it. Sometimes the ick of stability is a turnoff because it can also be like a wolf in sheep's clothing. I may not want to go fully here in the episode, but it just came to me, like, sometimes the stability also then, it's like, does this person really want, like, a mommy? Like,
mm,
does this stable relationship then turn into me having the role of a caretaker, and then what I think I've escaped in the over functioning ends up becoming this role? And let's say it's not to the level of, like,
mm,
a man child, like we talked about in the cheating episode. Let's say it's like a, we have equitable, even if we have equitability in the relationship and we share chores and what have you, like we've touched on in other episodes.
mhm,
What if that still puts me near, psychologically, a position or a role that I have resentment towards, or that I have fear about, or that wasn't modeled to
mm,
me? Then even more so, the stability of the two parent household, the relationship or what have you, might be triggering to me, because maybe I never had that, or maybe I don't know, if I didn't have that, maybe I don't know how to do it, or I did have it modeled, but it was the
mm,
opposite, where the parents always fought, or they didn't share any chores, or one parent did everything, the other did nothing, right? Like, we can't really escape the over functioning, under functioning. That I also think leads
mm.
to the ick of stability.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I would sort of approach that though is I think that the one thought process that's just helped
Mm-hmm.
me a lot in everything we do is there's nothing on the face of the planet that stops growing and keeps living. So why
Mm,
do we believe our relationships can do the same thing?
yeah.
Because when you start talking about like we've been dating for 7 years or 13 years or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
if the whole caveat of this was also like a pause, like a lack of growth in it, and it's pretty funny because I know when my wife listens to this, she's gonna be like, "Yeah, we dated for 7 years. Yeah, we did, but our relationship was infinitely growing through that period of time. And it wasn't a surprise. We were actually both in agreement, um, because we had the tough conversations. I just said, I don't want to be the husband that brings a report card home to you. So I want to be done with my master's program, and then let's hit it. Um, and that's exactly like literally that's what happened. I finished my program in June and we were married in October. So like
Mm-hmm.
we had the plan there.
Yes.
Um, but I'm gonna say something that's gonna be controversial, but it
Good.
just seems like it works in reality. Where if you're already hedging bets from the start of like, I don't know if I want to marry this person, so I'm gonna move in with this person, you're actually already silencing your intuition. Your intuition is already telling you, hey, there's something here. And so this is just the most acceptable way of becoming exposed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and maybe there's social pressure, maybe there's peer pressure, maybe there's family pressure. There's all sorts of things that pop in. Just because those pressures align doesn't mean that that gives us a permission slip to abuse ourselves. So, like, I'm really big on trust your gut. If you're
Mhm.
already saying, there's a slowness that needs to happen in this process, then perfect. Why do we need to get a lease together? Why do we need to open ourselves up to
Right.
it? Because I
Right.
feel like that's sort of how we talk ourselves into a position that we ultimately do not want.
Mhm.
Because if you're having trouble blending lives as two unique individuals originating from their own houses, that uniqueness and that challenge doesn't go away now that we've actually closed your circles. Like your circles have gotten tighter. And what's going to happen is actually probably more of a complacency or a laziness that pops in. And I think that we can actually trade stability for complacency because that's sort of
Mhm.
what we go into is the ick is, oh, someone's chasing after me, someone wants to pursue a relationship with me, and we would rather just be more into the, hey, can we high five, and it's nice to have a roommate that also has certain benefits with it. But
Mhm.
let's talk about the reality of a intimate relationship should not look like a business arrangement. It shouldn't be us sitting here and saying, "Okay, here's the chore chart. You do these, I do the ones that I don't or I want to do, you do the ones that I don't want to do, and then we'll find happiness in the middle." That's extremely sterile. Like, there is also not room for spontaneity, and very rarely is there room for grace to be involved in this.
Mhm.
Because any
Mhm.
time that we don't do our assigned chore, there has to be some sort of punishment or some sort of lecture or some sort of call out, and this comes back to the, well, were you looking for stability or were you looking
Mhm.
for some sort of transactional partnership?
Mhm. And I think to some level, I just got in a heated debate with my brother and my my parents. Actually, they were more on like they more saw my view of it, and my
Yeah,
brother was kind of like passionately defending a different.
of
That's like
course.
how we
The
enjoy
brother,
our family time, you know. And we're very dynamic, so it's like heated, but it's respectful at the same time.
of
And
course.
his point was um, the trade off that primally, which I understand to a certain level, that men want to feel nurtured, not necessarily mothered, but nurtured by a feminine partner if they're in a straight relationship. And I'm like, I can get behind that. Like, I think if things are going well and it's stable and healthy, we also enjoy nurturing. We
Mhm.
don't enjoy when it crosses over into mommying or mothering.
No.
But the debate became about the if it's a two parent, two income, like dual income household, and then with or without kids was two different arguments. Who is doing the stabilization of the home life? Who is doing the stabilization of the finances? Like, this is where I think if you can do the unsexy business negotiations of a prenup or those brass tacks conversations prior to entering into
Yeah.
these escalations or agreements, then you get to enjoy them more and you have more room for spontaneity and growth because you've taken out the expectations and assumptions ahead of time that are usually the undoing of
Mhm.
the stability. Well, we were great until, how many times have we heard this in our office? Till we moved in, till we had kids, till the in-laws, till shit got real. We were stable until we were actually forced to confront what the real events of life are, and then the facade of, well, we'll just do this. And when you're no longer a two-person unit and there's not only external factors acting upon you, there might also be like a triad or a, kind of a quadrangle now in the restructuring of
Mhm.
your family system, and responsibility isn't just to yourselves, then to your partner as an adult. It can cause a destabilization, and then the relationship that was once very stable that you wanted can become unstable, and it creates an instability that sometimes couples can renegotiate and come back from. But sometimes it's like, well, they kind of go into the magical thinking, not in a positive way and more of a negative way of like, this always happens in a relationship, or it goes
Mhm.
well until life gets real and then I'm going to pull the ripcord.
Mhm.
Sometimes if it's healthy, it's worth working through that and
Of course.
restabilizing the unit. And other times it is going to veer more into, this is just going to create so much destabilization in myself. This person doesn't want to remain stable, or it's going to cost me whatever myself
Mhm.
to stabilize the relationship. And I think when we can be honest about from the start why are instability and stability sometimes so diametrically opposed, and yet one is more attractive than the other, when I don't have something to meddle in or something to fix or something to audition for, then I might feel like I don't have a role. I might feel like I have to create a whole new version of myself to be in this stable relationship. And then what are we, like you said earlier, going to connect about? If it's not conflict, if it's not fighting about chores, if it's not money or any of that and all that's taken care of, do I actually know how to be in a relationship that is stable,
Mm,
that I enjoy without creating conflict to create connection?
mm, agree. That's like a great insight right there. Because I think there's like just to tag on there is also we misconstrue that stability is fantasy. Because like you don't have stability when you're in the honeymoon phase of your relationship, and a lot of people are like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "No, no, no. It's all fantasy. It's all gourmet, right?
No, no, no,
Like
no, no.
it's really easy for me to take my wife out, goes drop $250 on a meal, maybe take her over to, have a nice hotel night out, things like that. And we then start, oh, this is the stability. And that's when those things are like, until the in laws, until the kids, because this is the real life coming home to roost. So, if you guys can walk through a pottery barn and build a house together, that doesn't mean that you have stability. Anyone can do that. Hell,
Mm-hmm.
Restoration Hardware is a beautiful place,
It is.
but that doesn't mean that my relationship is rooted in what is actually tangible. And this
Mm-hmm.
is what we get like we move through relationships trying to check off these social check boxes. Like I feel like right now with a lot of my clients, the joke that I have with them is like, when are you doing your Europe trip? Because like
Mm-hmm.
every relationship has to have a Europe trip now in it, and like it's like
I
why
love it.
do you like to go to Europe?
No,
Oh,
we
it's
have
just what
to.
everyone's doing. You got to go
We
to
must.
Italy, and it's like, well, is that like what you want to do? Or again, do we sort of loop ourselves into these trial periods of this relationship? And then after we're broke, the credit cards are racked up, or we're
Mm-hmm.
exhausted from just going in the gourmet direction, then we actually come down to where we live life and we go, wait a second, found a great travel companion, but I didn't
Mm-hmm.
actually find someone who's compatible with my style of attachment or relationship or
Right.
expectations in life. Um, and I see this a lot. Like I don't leave room for the guys that I work with to make the excuses of like, hey, we had a child with special needs drop in our lap, or I
Mm,
lost my career of 20 years, or as a justification to then, throw a hand grenade into their relationship. There seems to be, in the context of lacking stability, we think that there are certain social justifications for like, oh, then it was okay for me to walk outside of my relationship, oh, it was okay for me to seek something else. The thing that I absolutely like cannot stand is when I hear like, well, but porn isn't as bad as getting a stripper. Like,
mm,
I'm sure like if that's how we're going to navigate as bad, what is as bad, right? Like, and these are a part of paying attention to, hey, how do we have a relationship that's built in connectivity?
mhm,
Like, is it the gourmet events are the only things that are keeping us connected? Another takeaway is I had a client that like had found someone that like, man, we love the same bands, we love going to concerts, we love that
yeah,
travel aspect of that. But then they found like outside of those trips, there was just such a dryness or sterility in the relationship.
mm,
And so they had found a great travel partner. But when it came to like meeting my needs in a daily functionable way, I don't think it was even blaming this other person for their lack of ability. It just wasn't on their radar.
yeah.
And so, are we finding people that we can have gourmet experiences with versus finding someone that I could build a lifetime with?
Hey there, listeners. Are you tired of settling for less than you deserve in your relationships? Do you ever feel like you're not being seen, heard, or valued the way that you want? Or maybe you've been wondering why you keep attracting the same kinds of people into your life, or why certain patterns seem to repeat themselves in your relationships. The answer might be deeper than you think, and you can find it in my new course. Rewire Your Relationships is a transformative course designed to help you stop settling for less than you deserve and start embodying your most confident, assertive, and authentic self in your relationships. You'll explore how your early experiences and parental influences have shaped your views on love, dating, and self worth. This isn't just about tips and tricks for dating, it's about understanding the core beliefs that drive relationships that you attract. You'll learn how to break free from those old patterns and start creating the kind of connections that truly reflect who you are. Imagine stepping into a relationship with clarity and confidence, knowing you're attracting people who value and respect you for who you really are, your deeply authentic self. The Rewire Your Relationship course gives you the tools to rewrite your relationship story, one where you're no longer settling, but thriving. Visit taliabombola.com/rewire your relationships or check the link in the show notes for more.
I feel like what you're describing too puts us, it's like microdosing the instability and the thrill. And sometimes people have a fear of settling down, or they have a mismatch of adrenaline seeking or like sensory novelty
Yeah.
seeking. And we know that from Helen Fisher's research, the love types, that there are certain people
Mhm.
who are more driven to seek novelty than others, and
Correct.
they're often incompatible long term in relationships
Mm.
on the basis, on this one piece of data, on the basis that if our ability to compromise doesn't have the same prioritization level as
Yeah.
either of our individual drives to either have it consistent or have it be novel, we're not going to be able to come to an agreement. And one
Mm.
partner, usually the one who is more sensory seeking or novelty seeking, they still want to go travel, they still want to do this. The other one's more of a homebody. They don't
Yeah.
always get along. Now that doesn't mean two homebodies always get along. More two
No.
homebodies, I think, are more likely to get along than two novelty seekers, because what if we
Mm.
don't seek novelty from the same source? What if I
True.
want to go to Italy and you want to go skydiving, or I want to go to the
Yeah.
moon and you want to go to wherever? So it's about compromise at the end of the
Mm.
day, and not compromise of self,
Yeah.
compromise on a specific topic. And if I want
Mm.
more thrill and I am afraid of settling down, I'm afraid of commitment, I'm
Yeah.
afraid of vulnerability, I am familiar with chaos, I grew up in a chaotic environment, so part of my
Mm.
subconscious needs that to feel like this is the relationship I
Mhm.
should be in, and you mix media into that as well, it's no wonder why the new societal trope. I
Mm.
mean, we joke about other icks too, like when a guy rides a horse, or I saw one today on Instagram that the girl was like, I just imagine him standing outside the shower waiting for the water to heat up, and that's an ick. I'm like, literally, no one can
Mm.
just exist anymore, because now obviously it's taken a turn that like very basic
Yeah.
normal behaviors, they're like, it's so weird if they think about it. Like, of course, if you perseverate on anything, it's going to create some sort of emotion inside of you or thought. So don't
For
overthink
sure.
it, but also don't underthink it. And I think sometimes
Mm.
people overlook the other icks that could be in the relationship. They
Mm.
in the unstable relationships, they minimize the instability and they maximize the edginess, the bad boy, the whatever, the
Mm.
locus of control is internal, like what does it make me feel like?
Yep.
And then with the stable relationships, they're icking all of the things that actually are indicative of a healthy relationship, and then
Mm.
they're nitpicking, well, he was too nice, well, he planned too much. And I've worked with people in my office, I'm like, this is literally everything that you've asked for. Like, you
Yeah.
actually are getting the ick from yourself because of who you're going to have to become and change and modify
Mhm.
in a healthy way to adapt to be in a secure functioning relationship. You're really,
Mm.
the ick is coming from inside of you, of how much work you might have to do to confront why you
Yeah.
are still romanticizing instability. And I think it's not a comfortable conversation to have for many
Not at
clients, to
all.
address why does stability give you the ick, but it is one of those 8 or 9 factors. Why are you afraid of being
Mm.
vulnerable? Why are you afraid of being cared for? Why are you afraid? What does it push you up against when it comes to dependency needs, when it comes to reliance needs? And relying on someone is different than being reliant on them. Being able to depend on someone is different than being
Mm.
dependent on them. However, think about many people from our generation, we're in a similar age bracket, who were parented by boomers or one above or one below that generation, where it wasn't, I can depend on you and rely
Mm.
on you in the one sense. It was, I am dependent and reliant upon you. I can't have my own bank account. I can't create the
Mm.
stability that I can now on my own. So that's a
Yeah.
whole other cultural shift that we're coming up against too. It's like, well, maybe I don't want that type of stability, but I still want
Mm.
emotional stability. And were either of your parents emotionally unstable, right? Again, this repetition compulsion. Are you trying to tame the beast and finally be the lovable child that you never got to be in your family of origin. This goes so deep that that stability piece, I think, pushes on a lot of people's primal fears.
Well, I think it's the primal fear also pushes past like the cathartic feel. And
Yeah.
the cathartic feel is that chemistry, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we always talk about that, oh, our chemistry is so good, right? And in some ways, in these relationships, we also start physical intimacy sooner than we probably should, right?
Yep.
The chemistry feels great. The cathartic feeling feels great. We get all sorts of dopamine and serotonin rushes from being able to meet each other in our most vulnerable physical forms. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that the stability side, when we start to feel the ick, is when we start to feel the crossover of that chemistry actually coming into the emotional side.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's, for good, bad, or otherwise, in our society, we've moved more into becoming physically intimate sooner than emotionally grounded in intimacy in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's the whole joke of like the bases, right? We'll run bases before we really know how to spell last names. And so what's interesting about that process though is that that can be the next ick that shows up is we're really good at putting our parts near each other. And
Yes.
then now all of a sudden our hearts are getting closer, and I'm just borrowing your line.
Yay.
Our hearts are growing closer together. And this feels weird, right? Because all of a
Yeah.
sudden now I can't abandon you.
Or
Because
myself. Yeah.
yeah, because like it's like, oh, I actually I
uh,
I've laughed so many times because I've either been in the position or I hear it through clients of like that moment you wake up in the morning and you want to text them and you're like, but I shouldn't because you're like, I don't want to play this.
cool. Don't have
Yeah,
needs.
yeah,
Don't show
yeah.
dependency.
Like got to keep them guessing. And this is like, okay, so I'm gonna deny my emotional self, like my desire,
For
my
the sake
really
of
my
what? Yeah.
yeah, because this is the joke. It's like because again, like stop looking at our celebrities
Do
as the
not.
mile markers of the relationships we want. Like, no, these
No.
they don't live in our lives. Guess what? They get to
No.
be so insulated by their money that they are actually like they have insurance policies from the consequences of their own poor decisions,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe pay attention to that of, hey, is the chemistry actually turning out to be something that I can trust because emotionally I'm being sought after.
Yes.
Emotionally, I'm feeling safety. And I think that that's like the beginning of a lot of friend zones is
Mm-hmm.
because people will make us feel a certain way that is scary because we haven't experienced that in a relationship, or we're told that if we feel a certain way that's going to be us giving up our power, so we might as well ghost them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's how a lot of men show up in this process is all of a sudden they go from that stag mindset to like imagining having babies with someone. And all of a sudden they go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's not screw this up for ourselves, right? We're finally making good money. We got our own places. And now
Mm-hmm.
we're going to
Mm-hmm.
settle down. Yeah, it's weird. It's almost like that's a system, right? It's almost like it's hardwired for us to procreate and have safety and seek out fellowship and relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what's the best way? Just ghost, just disappear because I can't actually tell you what I feel other than it makes me scared. Well, guess what? If you're in a committed relationship and there isn't a level of scared or fear, you're probably not in a committed relationship because you love a person in a way that they could absolutely destroy you if they abused you. I'm
That's
not
yeah.
saying that
No.
is the primary focus, but if you don't have that realization that I trust this person in a way that it will make me vulnerable, you don't have an unconditionally held relationship. There's a
Mm-hmm.
power struggle that is existing.
Mm-hmm. And true vulnerability means the susceptibility to be hurt or wounded. So it's
Boom.
normal to fear being vulnerable in a relationship, and it's the often unfortunate consequence of
Mm,
attempted vulnerability so many times
yeah.
prior in unhealthy slash unsafe
Mm,
relationships that creates hyper independence, that creates over
mm,
functioning as a way to, well, if I do all for you, then you don't need to do for me, which means you don't disappoint me potentially, or you don't achieve and then set my expectation that somebody's actually capable of doing what I've always wanted. So again, sometimes a safeguard of
yeah.
disappointment and a safeguard of then I'm not misplaced or replaced in my role of being the overfunctioner who does it all.
Hmm.
You mix that with that fear of vulnerability, getting close to that feeling with, okay, now I'm actually in my first healthy relationship. Now I have the ick because of the stability that is almost a predicate for
Mhm.
vulnerability if we're looking at it from that perspective. And if I don't have comfort with that, I might sabotage the stable relationship, not because I don't want it, maybe because I feel unworthy of it, but definitely because I do not have practice with the vulnerability required to obtain it or to continue to be in that relationship. It is confronting work when you're in a stable,
Mm,
healthy, secure, functioning relationship that both of you, in a loving way and a graceful way, can call each other
yeah.
out. Hey, that doesn't work for me. What works better for me is fill in the blank. Okay, noted. What would it cost me and any resource to do that? Do I trust you? Do I see the future? Okay, boom, boom, boom. Like as a guy, that's kind of the 4 layers you go through. And then you start to make the change. Okay, great. If I bring something to your attention in a stable relationship, likely, unless it's this core part of this person and
Mhm.
they've put you on notice from the beginning, they're willing to make a bend or a shift
Mm,
to further accommodate the relationship rather than their oneness. And that's where
mm,
selflessness mixed with selfishness is the best blend in a stable relationship rather than self abandonment or high levels of selfishness that can border on
mhm.
narcissism or an unintegrated narcissistic psyche.
Yeah.
If I don't know how to share and I always think it's about me, like we talked about with the devouring mother, then of course a stable relationship where the other person's over functioning and creates, if it's only creating stability in one of the partners,
Mm,
that's not a stable
no.
relationship. It has to create a little bit of instability in terms of keeping you on your toes of like, wow, this person's really pushing me to grow to be my best self. And I know they'll always be there for me. They should feel like home and an adventure all at once. That's the goal of
Mm.
not having stability feel like an ick. At least that's what I teach my clients to strive for. And then I also play devil's advocate that people are very good actors. People can be very good liars, and no one is nicer than a guy who wants to have sex with you.
Yeah, I haven't experienced that one yet. But
Really, I would imagine there's a lot of guys who come on to you.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of trucker kinks out there, and like
Yeah,
it's just exhausting, Talia.
beat him up
Uh,
with a stick, but not that one. Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
Um, it's interesting how you put it because it is a truth that a committed relationship is like a seatbelt. It's not going to protect you from everything that you're going to potentially experience,
True.
but it is going to be something that can be safety in one of the worst crashes
True.
of your lives.
Hmm.
A lot of us, though, we can't stand the thought process of being not dependent, but being vulnerable enough to include someone as a traveler in our journey,
Hmm.
right? And I think that therapy is actually one of those great resources where it like role models that,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Now, the
So true.
difference is you're not in a loving relationship with me in that way, but we are showing that emotional intimacy, emotional vulnerability can be something that I can use without the default always being me being betrayed.
Hmm.
Okay. The challenge is we have to take it out of what's very much a like biosphere. Therapy is done in our offices, done in our homes, and it's a practice. It's a scrimmage. It's not
Right.
real life. But we have to then try to use that in the relationships that are around us. A lot of times, what I hear is when we come in from being betrayed, having something happen in a relationship, and coming back to the like, was it the stability that got me. It's really there was the lack of actually integrating these check-ins
Yeah.
of saying, I know I feel vulnerable, but let me sort of take the temperature of my partner.
Hmm.
Let me actually express my vulnerability. You know, a lot of the men that I work with when they're in like their sexual addiction recovery, something that I work with them on is the fact that we actually have to let our partner know when we're horny. We have to let our partner know when we're craving physical intimacy. And see what's interesting about sex addiction is in sex addiction, we get trained, and this isn't a permission slip, but this is just how we condition ourselves is that fulfilling our physical needs to be done in isolation because it's the highest chance of getting our needs met. I mean,
Hmm.
it's why we watch porn alone, right? It's really
Mm.
difficult to just be sitting in the living room and be like, "Hey, how you doing? I'm just watching some porn." And we don't do
You
it
know
that way.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, just just
The
on
new
the
that's not the
browsers,
news. That's not
like
the news. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
just the birds and the bees, babe.
Yeah.
And so, like, no, what we're actually conditioning ourselves for is if I'm going to get my needs met, I'm going to do it alone.
Mm,
So the inverse has to be utilized in our sobriety, but there's vulnerability in that. There's a vulnerability of going to my wife, girlfriend, committed partner, and guess what? There is the legitimate headache, sickness, tiredness defense. Like you're able to have it, right? That's not
mhm.
what I'm saying. You're
The
not
person may
allowed to,
not be able to meet your need though. That's the
but that's the
what you're saying is
vulnerability.
the shift. I might be said no to. I also might be said yes right now or yes later to, and I need to consent like in a mutually beneficial and open
Mhm.
reciprocity relationship. I would like to be interacted with, that I will be assumed if all things are above board, I will say yes. It may not be immediate, right? Especially with
Correct.
kids, that might I can't maybe drop everything and do that, but it doesn't mean the desire isn't there.
Yeah.
And if I don't know, the only way the desire isn't there is if I don't know that it is there on your end, or if you don't know it's there on my end, because then we're left guessing. And if the need is being met, of course, especially as a woman,
Well,
it's
and
like 100% success that we can fulfill ourselves and satisfy ourselves, but that's a different goal, right? If my
right.
ideal is I'm going to satisfy one urge and it's not about a connection need, it's about like a hormonal release or
Mm,
a mind clearing of it, that's a different purpose for the connection, and then I am being vulnerable with myself to meet that need. That is separate though than I'm going to circumvent or rob my partner of the vulnerable experience of being intimate with them and just assume they will be, not interested in meeting my need or what have you. And if that's genuine, that they're not interested in
yeah.
meeting that need, that's another thing to look at, of like, how stable really is your relationship if you feel like you can only have your satisfaction when it's initiated and completed by your own self.
Well, rejection isn't punishment. And that's
No.
where, but that's the default in the mind of a sex addict is that if I get
True.
rejected, it's some sort of
Yeah.
punishment.
Hmm.
There's some sort of negative connotation of she doesn't want to be with me. So instead of the fragility of my ego having to navigate that, I'll just meet my own need. And this is also a part of I feel like we've been trying to tease it out in this episode. When we talk about stability, when we have an ick about stability, there's also an ick about trusting ourselves. So, like
Hmm.
a lot of sex addiction, in my personal opinion, is a trust issue. The trust
Yeah.
issue is if this person doesn't meet my immediate needs, they will never meet my needs, and then I will die because my needs won't be met. And it sounds stupid because you're like, what are you
Primal
talking
though.
about? It's just a bad night. But that's how we internalize it. Why? Because a lot of times those attachment issues have been rooted in our very youthful sides. So
Hmm.
why do I act like a 7-year-old or a 13-year-old? Well, because that's the one that's currently steering the trauma wheel right now.
Right. Right.
So it's coming back to that realization of I have to have a level of vulnerability in my relationship of telling you what my needs are. It might be the nudge in the middle of the night and hearing the I've got a, meeting in the morning or
Hmm.
whatever it is, but I still need the point of contact. Why? Because I haven't silenced myself, and two, my partner or significant other realizes that I am trying to still instigate.
Hmm.
So I'm still trying to initiate, I'm still
Hmm.
trying to have connection. And it is better to have the attempt than to have the silence.
Yes.
Because that's again one of those positions where you brought it up before when you're talking about the guessing. Whenever we guess, we always implement our own assumptions based off of the negative emotions we're actively experiencing.
Hmm.
So
We
my
don't use the
assumption
scientific
is
method. Yeah.
no, my assumption is she doesn't care about me anymore. She cares
Right.
about this kid. I'm
Right.
just a money making tool in this family. I'm the
Hmm.
ATM, and
Hmm.
therefore I'm not needed in any other capacity. She's gotten everything she wants and she's happy, which is
Mm.
also hysterical because she's on the other side saying, I feel like a milk machine and a touch machine, and I would
Yes.
like to have some silence. And
Yes.
so when we recognize that, wait a second, our assumptions are not actually always correct. They're most of the time they're not. No one has the crystal ball in this situation. Then the best thing we can do is at least have the points of contact of we're trying to meet in the middle. And one day, based off statistics, if we have enough attempts, there will be a repair. There
Hmm.
will be an experience.
Hmm.
And that can be our gourmet experience of the day, evening, week, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's not about traveling externally and having those trips. Those are important, but to
Mhm.
be able to feel comfortable in a stable, healthy relationship and not get the ick from it
Mm,
is our work to do individually, it's also our work to do relationally. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the more important questions to ask. And obviously, I'm biased being in this field, dedicating my life to this profession, etc.
Mm,
That is one of the first questions I do think is important for creating
yeah.
chemistry. I will say personally, like if somebody were to say, hey, I'm really into
Mm,
self development, or I think it's a priority to go to therapy or what have you, that
yeah.
piques my interest a lot more than like I drive a Lambo or I traveled to
Mm,
all these places or I went to Dartmouth for school. Like that's great, but if you're not going to be willing to confront when the rubber hits the road, which it inevitably
yeah.
does in every relationship, I don't even want to go down this path with you. Like there's no sense in that. And I
Mm,
think to learn from previous missteps or mistakes of like assuming that that would end up
yeah.
being somebody's passion, or that I could um, convince them or just be such a model for it. And a lot of the women I work with
Mm,
are the same way of like, I talk so highly about therapy and I love self development and this. And I'm like, great, but how did you meet the person you're dating? At a bar, on an app, on a this. If you didn't meet at a place where it's like we're looking for stability and self growth, don't
mhm.
be surprised if the other person doesn't prioritize that or doesn't consume. I did on when I used to do the couples guide podcast, Ryan and I did an episode on like media diets of like
Yeah.
not policing what your partner
Oh, yeah.
watches, whether it's like the self-help podcast or are they checking like how to chip whatever in golf. Like if that frustrates you, then pick a different partner. Don't try to change the person into someone they're not. Become a different, either you need to become a different person
Mm,
or you need to pick a different person, because if that's a deal breaker for you, then it's not going to be a stable relationship. It's
yeah.
going to be very rocky. And one wind blown in the wrong direction is going to blow your house down. That's not stability. That's like a false sense of stability that comes from muting needs, not being vulnerable, and trying to keep the status quo of what we think a relationship should be. Stable relationships
Mhm,
have fights. Stable relationships have, not that I
mhm.
recommend it constantly, but there are times where it can escalate to yelling at your partner, not name calling, but like being so passionate, you raise your voice and then you go take accountability after. It involves maybe sometimes storming out and then coming back in and be like, I don't know why I just did that. Damn it, I love you. I hate fighting with you. Like, I'm not saying stable relationships have no fire or no passion,
Mhm.
especially if you're with an Italian. I'll just tell you there's a lot of fire when it comes to conflict. And stable relationships also have repair attempts and repair
Mhm.
successes. They have consideration of how my actions are going to impact not
Mm.
only my partner but myself and how I show up. They have, no, I can't do that because my partner's already made a request of me and I want to honor that, and I'm not going to be subject to like, oh, she's yanking your chain or got you on the leash again.
'Cause half the time the people that make that comment are the ones that are in terrible relationships
Or
themselves, right?
single or dating
Like,
20 year
so
olds when they're 40.
if you also want to hear this, if we're talking about is your ick stability, are you building relationships out of houses of cards? Are you building them out of bricks? Like you
Mm-hmm.
get to choose,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't get to sit back and be surprised when you built a relationship off of a house of cards and it gets blown over.
I didn't know what
Like,
happened.
oh my god, like because again, you didn't let anything set up. You didn't build a foundation. I hope that that's what you've heard over the conversation that we've had today,
Yeah,
which is you don't also get to say stability sucks or it's boring or whatever it is when you've actually not used it strategically to begin with.
exactly.
Stability, there is that safety of we can still have arguments, we can still have fights, but we aren't going to abandon each other.
Or
However, if
step
that's
out
your
of the relationship when
yeah,
those push on are, oh man, this is confronting.
yeah, but if we use those as strategies at the beginning of the relationship, we can't be surprised when they're apparent throughout the relationship.
True.
And so that's why you have to, like, a lot of times we love to act like we trip and fall into relationships. If you have, you're in trouble because sure, things happen, we grow, we have attachment, things can
Yeah.
change, but you still have every ability to be disciplined and deliberate on how
Mm-hmm.
you start that relationship. And I highly recommend that you work from a position of what you want in a relationship, not what you don't want.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times, oh, well, it's just not the worst things. Well, you know what? I've never heard in any other process that's meaningful in life that we've said, well, let's just start with all the things we don't want and we'll just then accept whatever's not on that list.
It's such good chemistry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to hate you, like I just want to start off being like, what a nail in my side. That's so
Yeah.
sexy. I
Oh,
want to get so close to
I
you.
love how he
Yeah.
makes me feel. How's he make you feel? Huge pain
Yeah.
in my ass.
Yeah. Oh, I
Wonderful.
dread it. I literally dread seeing him. It's the best. I'll see him 7 o'clock Friday. And you just made me think of the chemistry feeling or the excitement feeling that we often perceive inaccurately, but that we often perceive with the unstable relationships. It's like, but I showed them all of my wounds and they didn't leave. It's like, yeah, you dumb bitch, because he's literally taking notes and is going to hurt you in that way or worse. Like some people hear your, and dumb bitch is a neutral term in this case. Some people hear your trauma and they go, I am so sorry that that happened to you. I will do my absolute best to not inflict that again. And if it ever feels
Mhm.
near that for you, please let me know because that's not my intent. That's a secure functioning person. And if
Yep.
you overshare on the first date, if you blabber all of this stuff, a healthy person
Mhm.
is going to go, no, thank you, because that's too much. An unhealthy person is going to go like, yeah, that didn't phase me, or they're going to also overshare their trauma. And then what you think is
Mm.
vulnerability because you're sharing all of your trauma, that's actually not necessarily vulnerability, but it's that
Right.
false sense of vulnerability. And I shared it with this guy and he didn't seem phased because he probably wasn't listening, because he's looking at you for what can I get out of you, the bad boy, the dark triad, or the
Mhm.
quadrant personality traits. It's like I'm using you as an object. Like I don't actually care about your subjective needs, I care about my subjective needs being met through utilizing you objectively. And
Yeah.
that is not vulnerability. That's an unhealthy relationship, feigning as vulnerable. Well, I shared all of my stuff and they stayed. It's a matter of time. Like the clock has started. If you share all of that vulnerably and they don't share back, oh, he wasn't phased. We'll see. We'll see. Call me in 6 months when he does the exact same thing to you that all the other guys did, because you literally are teaching them how much disrespect you can tolerate and not leave.
But yeah, it's almost like you're getting. If I can just, it'll be rude to say it this way, but it's almost like getting the user manual.
Yeah.
Because if you find me off of Tinder,
Mm-hmm.
Grinder, Hinge, whatever it is, and you just pour your heart and soul out while we're at the table, am I really listening, or am I just walking through how I've been taught this process goes? So I'm gonna
Yeah.
listen to you for at least 90 minutes. It's like the most fucked up therapy
It is.
session in your world, where it's like that person is just there because they know at the end of the day they're gonna get something out of it.
That's
I'll get my
actually
I'll get my physical needs, and then I'm gone. I
you literally.
like
Yeah.
like it, and if you
Mm,
want to, it's here's the breaking bro code side of our relation,
yeah.
our podcast. That's what it is. So you can sit there and you pour out everything that you need to become physically vulnerable. While the other side, he's just like, I gotta sit through this long enough until she starts pulling off clothes,
Great.
and
Right. That's literally what I was thinking while I had
and
that
then
just
and
moment. I
then
was like, they
oh, he's
use
a
it.
great. But then let's also count the next brunch. I'm sorry, I'm being stereotypical. The next brunch she goes to with her friends, she's gonna talk about how what a wonderful listener he is.
Oh
He's not
yeah.
a listener. He is a survivor. Okay, he will sit
Cue
there
Reba McIntyre. Yeah.
and he will sit there and listen to whatever you throw at him. But in his head, he's playing freaking Tetris,
Yep.
and he's waiting till okay,
He's
perfect.
just
Here's
biding his
my
time.
time to get my 15 minutes of fame, and then I'm gone again.
Yeah, all I have to do
And
is listen to her talk about her childhood, and then we have sex. It's like you're not, if they're going to brunch, you're not having the same brunch conversation. I can tell you that right now. They listen, and they let you feel vulnerable. That doesn't let it somebody
Mhm.
allowing you space to what you think is feel vulnerable and share all of your stuff does not mean that they are also going to comfort you. That is the true like we talked about. That's the
Yeah,
definition of vulnerability, where it's like susceptible to be hurt or wounded. They might not do it that night, but mark my words, it's like a sleeper cell. It will come after you. Like the
yeah.
hurt and wounding will come later when
At
you
some point,
realize you
it
were
reached
used.
critical mass.
Yeah.
Some point, it's critical mass. You can't slow
Yeah.
it down.
Yep. Yeah.
So, with
That's
that cheery note,
that
we'll
should give you
sign
the
off
ick.
here.
That should give you the ick. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to say thank you so much for the comments, for the
Yeah.
emails, the
Yes.
direct messages, the
Yes.
hearts, the shares. I mean, we're on a vein here that we can tell that you guys are
Like.
liking the content.
Yeah.
And so we're just trying to stay within the realms of like what you want.
Mm-hmm.
But please continue to reach out, continue to ask questions. It
Yeah.
helps us sort of set up what do we need to tackle. We hope that you're receiving something out of this because we love making stuff that helps you live easier lives.
Yes.
And more importantly, find the relationships that you want, even if that's the relationship you currently have and there's just little tweaks that are needed.
Or if you need to
So,
totally like blow it up and date yourself for a while, like we're all here for
exactly.
you. You know, either way you slice it, we're here for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, with that, if you have any episode ideas you want for next episode, let us know. Otherwise, we'll surprise you and delight you and dazzle you in a couple
In two
weeks when we meet
weeks.
again.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Between Two Clinicians. We would so appreciate if this episode resonated with you, for you to share it with somebody, and also find your favorite podcast platform and like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast. We would love to attract more listeners just like you and have this message be spread to whoever needs it. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.